Hi, how is everybody doing today? It is 7 o'clock and I still have lag. Daniel, please don't do that. And we're not quite ready here, but I just figured that while we're waiting, I've got a little Bible passage. This is Psalm 27. I wrote it in my handy little notebook that I got for my birthday. And I wrote it today while it was during slow time at work this morning. So here is Psalm 27. This is in the English Standard Version. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to eat up my flesh, my adversaries and foes, it is they who stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war arise against me, yet I will be confident. One thing have I asked of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For he will hide me in his shelter in the day of trouble. He will conceal me under the cover of his tent. He will lift me high upon a rock. And now my head shall be lifted up above my enemies all around me, and I will offer in his tent sacrifices with shouts of joy. I will sing and make melody to the Lord. Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Be gracious to me and answer me. You have said, seek my face. My heart says to you, your face, Lord, do I seek. Hide not your face from me. Turn not your servant away in anger, O you who have been my help. Cast me not off, forsake me not, O God of my salvation. For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me in. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies. Give me not up to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and they breathe out violence. I believe that I shall look upon the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. So that was Psalm 27 in the English Standard Version of the Bible. And I just wanted to, I've been meditating on that psalm a lot in the last couple of weeks. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? And that is just something that we need to think about right now. Whom shall we be afraid of? What shall we be afraid of? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom or what shall I be afraid of? So, Psalm 27. So that was that. And like I said, we are still getting set up here. Daniel and I ran a little errand, and it wound up running a little longer than expected. And so we just finished dinner, like literally, like about 2 minutes before, actually, maybe less than that, before I hit go on the live stream. So, Rebecca, while we're waiting, would you like to give us the synopsis of where we are on the story? I'm not Rebecca. Oh my goodness, you're not. I was looking for Rebecca on the computer, and I looked over and talked to Rebecca over here, but she's not here. It's Kimberly. Kimberly's going to give us a synopsis of the story, where we are so far. Yeah, right? Okay, so tell us about the story.
Okay, so Edmund, he goes over to the witch's castle, and she takes him on the sledge.
And she was like super nice. I mean, it was basically like he was with Santa Claus.
No, she was very mean to him.
Okay.
And she basically treated him like, not exactly a slave, although kind of like someone who's been captured and and then she made him work a little bit too, because there were patches of grass.
Can you hear her? Can you hear her synopsis? We're still getting set up here. Daniel, can you turn off the light in the bathroom, please? Thank you.
So there were patches of grass, and the witch's spell started. And Santa Claus came, so that meant that the year was actually moved.
Except they didn't call him Santa Claus, did they? They called him Kris Kringle? Nope. Father Christmas. Oh. Okay. She says somewhat. So I'll turn it so that you can see it.
Okay, so then the sledge got stuck in one of the grassy spots, and they got it free, but like 5 minutes later it got stuck again, and the dwarf was like, I think we're gonna have to abandon the sledge. Excuse me, sorry. But so.
And the queen was really nice about it. She's like, thank you for your suggestion.
No, she was like,
great.
She was like,
What a team we are, fist bump, right?
She was like flaming hot and mad. So, yeah, I guess that's a good point.
Oh.
Okay, she was like really mad. So,
and she was like, the whole time, she's like, just take your time, it's okay.
No, she was like,
there when we get there.
Faster! And so meanwhile, the rest of the kids and the beavers, they're running toward the stone table, and they shelter in a small hole for the beavers.
Oh, a shelter in place, kind of like us now today?
No. It was like a tiny hole, barely able to fit all of them. And then they woke up to sleigh bells. But it was, as Dad said, Father Christmas, and he gave them presents.
Okay, I think you got some stuff out of order, but yeah, that's the gist of it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, JJ, all right. JJ is gonna, do you have a fidget or something to do? Coloring? Everyone can color unless you're following along in the book. And the kids don't have the option of following in the book because I only have one. Were you able to hear her better after I turned the computer? We're about to start here in just another minute. I don't think JJ has anything yet, and he's not trying to get anything. He's stretching his legs. He could get that Frozen coloring book. That would be okay.
Picture.
JJ, I don't need you being the secondary star, okay? Quickly. All right, so here we are. We were what? When you write 1 and 2 sentence comments, I don't really know what you're talking about.
That was rude.
No, I'm just being honest, not rude.
Because we all know that was very honest. I am the peanut gallery.
Okay. Are we ready to start? Okay, because I know that, but are we ready to start? Okay, JJ's not sitting down yet. I don't know if we're going to be able to read a sentence while he's going nuts. He's like practicing his Russian dance.
Hey, why are you guys starting to try to rush? I mean, if JJ's doing a Russian dance,
okay, all right. Okay. Because that's not what we're doing. This isn't dance hour, it's story hour. We're trying to settle you guys down.
Now, parenting through COVID-19 quarantine is no joke. It's hard.
I don't know if they can hear anything on that side of the. Mom just said parenting through COVID-19 quarantine is no joke. Okay, so sorry about the long interrupted introduction. JJ is still not settling.
No, he's been hit me on the head. He should be able to hit you on the head.
Everybody's way too comfortable. They're comfortable.
Yeah, it's. I don't know if this live streaming thing's gonna work out. Maybe I need to just record them and then post them. I'll record them when the kids are sleeping or something. Well,
Let's be respectful, please.
all right. So we're going to read chapter 12, Peter's first battle. While the dwarf and the white witch were saying this, miles away, the beavers and the children were walking on hour after hour into what seemed a delicious dream. Long ago, they had left the coats behind them, and by now they had even stopped saying to one another, "Look, there's a kingfisher," or "I say, bluebells," or "What was that lovely smell?" or "Just listen to that thrush." Now Easton's sneezing. They walked on in silence, drinking it all in, passing through patches of warm sunlight into cool green thickets, and out again into wide mossy glades where tall elms raised the leafy roof far overhead, and then into dense masses of flowering currant, and among hawthorn bushes where the sweet smell was almost overpowering. They had been just as surprised as Edmund when they saw the winter vanishing and the whole wood passing in a few hours or so from January to May. They hadn't even known for certain, as the witch did, that this was what would happen when Aslan came to Narnia. But they all knew that it was her spells which had produced the endless winter, and therefore they all knew when this magic spring began that something had gone wrong, and badly wrong, with the witch's schemes. And after the thaw had been going on for some time, they all realized that the witch would no longer be able to use her sledge. After that, they didn't hurry so much, and they allowed themselves more rests and longer ones. They were pretty tired by now, of course, but not what I'd call bitterly tired, only slow and feeling very dreamy and quiet inside, as one does when one is coming to the end of a long day in the open. Susan had a slight blister on one heel. They had left the course of the big river some time ago, for one had to turn a little to the right, that meant a little to the south, to reach the place of the stone table. Even if this had not been their way, they couldn't have kept to the river valley once the thaw began, for with all the melting snow, the river was soon in flood, a wonderful, roaring, thundering yellow flood, and their path would have been under water. And now the sun got low, and the light got redder, and the shadows got longer, and the flowers began to think about closing. "Not long now," said Mr. Beaver, and began leading them uphill across some very deep, springy moss. It felt nice under their tired feet, in a place where only tall trees grew very wide apart. The climb, coming at the end of the long day, made them all pant and blow. And just as Lucy was wondering whether she could really get to the top without another long rest, suddenly they were at the top, and this is what they saw. They were on a green open space from which you could look down on the forest spreading as far as one could see in every direction, except right ahead. Susan, the sea! In the very middle of this open hilltop was the stone table. It was a great grim slab of gray stone, supported on 4 upright stones. It looked very old, and it was cut all over with strange lines and figures that might be the letters of an unknown language. They gave you a curious feeling when you looked at them. The next thing they saw was a pavilion pitched on one side of the open place. A wonderful pavilion it was, and especially now when the light of the setting sun fell upon it, with sides of what looked like yellow silk, and cords of crimson, and tent pegs of ivory, and high above it on a pole a banner which bore a red rampant lion fluttering in the breeze, which was blowing in their faces from the far off sea. While they were looking at this, they heard a sound of music on their right, and turning in that direction, they saw what they had come to see. Aslan stood in the center of the crowd of creatures who had grouped themselves round him in the shape of a half moon. There were tree women and there were well women, dryads and naiads, as they used to be called in our world, who had stringed instruments. It was they who had made music. There were four great centaurs. The horse part of them was the huge English farm horses, and the man part was like a stern but beautiful giant. There was also a unicorn and a bull with the head of a man, and a pelican and an eagle and a great dog. And next to Aslan stood two leopards, of whom one carried his crown and the other his standard. But as for Aslan himself, the beavers and the children didn't know what to do or say when they saw him. People who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. If the children had ever thought so, they were cured of it now. For when they tried to look at Aslan's face, they just caught a glimpse of the golden mane and the great royal, solemn, overwhelming eyes, and then they found they couldn't look at him and went all trembly. Here is a picture of the Sorry, it's hard to line it up with the camera. Daniel, be quiet. Be quiet. Go on, whispered Mr. Beaver. No, whispered Peter. You first. No, sons of Adam before animals, whispered Mr. Beaver back again. Susan, whispered Peter. What about you? Ladies first. No, you're the eldest, whispered Susan. And of course, the longer they went on doing this, the more awkward they felt. Then at last, Peter realized that it was up to him. He drew his sword and raised it to the salute and hastily saying to the others, "Come on, pull yourselves together." He advanced to the lion and said, "We have come, Aslan." "Welcome, Peter, son of Adam," said Aslan. "Welcome, Susan and Lucy, daughters of Eve. Welcome, he-beaver and she-beaver." His voice was deep and rich and somehow took the fidgets out of them. They now felt glad and quiet, and it didn't seem awkward to them to stand and say nothing. "But where is the fourth?" asked Aslan. "He tried to betray them and joined the White Witch, O Aslan," said Mr. Beaver. And then something made Peter say, "That was partly my fault, Aslan. I was angry with him, and I think that helped him to go wrong." And Aslan said nothing either to excuse Peter or to blame him, but merely stood looking at him with his great unchanging eyes. And it seemed to all of them that there was nothing to be said. "Please, Aslan," said Lucy, "can anything be done to save Edmund?" "All shall be done," said Aslan, "but it may be harder than you think." And then he was silent again for some time. Up to that moment, Lucy had been thinking how royal and strong and peaceful his face looked. Now it suddenly came into her head that he looked sad as well. But next minute that expression was quite gone. The lion shook his mane and clapped his paws together. Terrible paws, thought Lucy, if he didn't know how to velvet them, and said, "Meanwhile, let the feast be prepared. Ladies, take these daughters of Eve to the pavilion and minister to them." When the girls had gone, Aslan laid his paw, and though it was velveted, it was very heavy, on Peter's shoulder and said, "Come, son of Adam, and I will show you a far-off sight of the castle where you are to be king." And Peter, with his sword still drawn in his hand, went with the lion to the southern edge of the hilltop. There a beautiful sight met their eyes. The sun was setting behind their backs. That meant that the whole country below them lay in the evening light, forest and hills and valley and winding away like a silver snake, the lower part of the great river. And beyond all this, miles away, was the sea, and beyond the sea, the sky, full of clouds which were just turning rose color with the reflection of the sunset. But just where the land of Narnia met the sea, in fact, at the mouth of the great hill, the great river, there was something on the little hill shining. It was shining because it was a castle, and of course the sunlight was reflected from all the windows which looked toward Peter and the sunset, but to Peter it looked like a great star resting on the seashore. That, O man, said Aslan, is Cair Paravel, of the 4 thrones in one of which you must sit as king. I show it to you because you are the firstborn, and you will be high king over all the rest. And once more Peter said nothing, for at that moment a strange noise woke the silence suddenly. It was like a bugle, but richer. It is your sister's horn, said Aslan to Peter in a low voice, so low as to almost be a purr, if it is not disrespectful to think of a lion purring. Sorry. For a moment, Peter did not understand. Then, when he saw all the other creatures start forward and heard Aslan say with a wave of his paw, "Back, let the prince win his spurs," he did understand, and set off running as hard as he could to the pavilion. And there he saw a dreadful sight. The naiads and dryads were scattering in every direction. Lucy was running toward him as fast as her short legs could carry her, and her face was as white as paper. Then he saw Susan make a dash for a tree and swing herself up, followed by a huge gray beast. At first, Peter thought it was a bear. Then he saw that it looked like an Alsatian, though it was far too big to be a dog. Then he realized that it was a wolf standing on its hind legs with its front paws against the tree trunk, snapping and snarling. All the hair on its back stood up on end. Susan had not been able to get higher than the second big branch. One of her legs hung down so that her foot was only an inch or two above the snapping teeth. Peter wondered why she had not get higher or at least take a better grip. Then he realized that she was just going to faint, and that if she fainted, she would fall off. Peter did not feel very brave. Indeed, he felt he was going to be sick, but that made no difference to what he had to do. He rushed straight up to the monster and aimed a slash of his sword at its side. That stroke never reached the wolf. Quick as lightning, it turned round, its eyes flaming, and its mouth wide open in a howl of anger. If it had not been so angry that it simply had to howl, it would have got him by the throat at once. As it was, though all this happened too quickly for Peter to think at all, he had just time to duck down and plunge his sword as hard as he could between the brute's forelegs into his heart. Then came a horrible, confused moment, like something in a nightmare. He was tugging and pulling, and the wolf seemed neither alive nor dead, and its bared teeth knocked against its forehead, and everything was blood and heat and hair. A moment later, he found that the monster lay dead, and he had drawn his sword out of it and was straightening his back and rubbing the sweat off its face and out of his eyes. He felt tired all over. Then, after a bit, Susan came down the tree. She and Peter felt pretty shaky when they met, and I won't say there wasn't kissing and crying on both sides, but in Narnia no one thinks any the worse of you for that. "Quick, quick!" shouted the voice of Aslan. "Centaurs, eagles! I see another wolf in the thickets. There, behind you. He has just darted away. After him, all of you. He will be going to his mistress. Now is your chance to find the witch and rescue the 4th son of Adam." And instantly, with a thunder of hoofs and a beating of wings, a dozen or so of the swiftest creatures disappeared into the gathering darkness. Peter, still out of breath, turned and saw Aslan close at hand. "You have forgotten to clean your sword," said Aslan. It was true. Peter blushed when he looked at the bright blade and saw it all smeared with the wolf's hair and blood. He stooped down and wiped it clean on the grass, then wiped it quite dry on his coat. "Hand it to me and kneel, son of Adam," said Aslan. And when Peter had done so, he struck him with the flat of the blade and said, "Rise up, Sir Peter, wolf's bane, and whatever happens, never forget to wipe your sword." The next chapter is chapter 13, Deep Magic from the Dawn of Time. So, how's the story going so far? How's the drawing going? Yeah? I've got some congestion, but I think I can do one more chapter and we'll see after that. All right, Deep Magic from the Dawn of Time, chapter 13. Now we must get back to Edmund. When he had been made to walk far further than he had ever known that anybody could walk, the witch at last halted in a dark valley all overshadowed with fir trees and yew trees. Edmund simply sank down and lay on his face, doing nothing at all, and not even caring what was going to happen. What was going to happen next, provided they would let him lie still. He was too tired even to notice how hungry and thirsty he was. The witch and the dwarf were talking close beside him in low tones. "No," said the dwarf, "it's no use now, O Queen. They must have reached the stone table by now. Perhaps the wolf will smell us out and bring us news," said the witch. "It cannot be good news if he does," said the dwarf. "4 thrones in Cair Paravel," said the witch. "How if only 3 were filled? That would not fulfill the prophecy." "What difference would that make now that he is here?" said the dwarf. He did not dare even now to mention the name of Aslan to his mistress. "He may not stay long, and then we would fall upon the 3 at Cair." "Yet it may be better," said the dwarf, "to keep this one." Here he kicked Edmund for bargaining with. "Yes, and to have him rescued," said the witch scornfully. "Then," said the dwarf, "we'd better do what we have to do at once. I would like to have it done on the stone table itself," said the witch. "That is the proper place. That is where it has always had to be done." "It will be a long time now before the stone table can again be put to its proper use," said the dwarf. "True," said the witch, and then, "Well, I will begin." At that moment, with a rush and a snarl, a wolf rushed up to them. "I have seen them. They were all at the stone table with him. They have killed my captain, Morgrim. I was hidden in the thickets and saw it all. One of the sons of Adam killed him. Fly, fly!" "No," said the witch. "There need be no flying. Go quickly. Summon all our people to meet me here as speedily as they can. Call out the giants and the werewolves and the spirits of those trees who are on our side. Call the ghouls and the boggles and the ogres and the minotaurs. Call the cruels and the hags, the specters and the people of the toadstools. We will fight. What? Have I not still my wand? Will not their ranks turn into stone even as they come on? Be off quickly. I have a little thing to finish here while you are away." The great brute bowed its head, turned, and galloped away. "Now," said she, "we have no table. Let me see. We had better put it against the trunk of a tree." Edmund found himself being roughly forced to his feet. Then the dwarf set him with his back against a tree and bound him fast. He saw the witch take off her outer mantle. Her arms were bare underneath it and terribly white. Because they were so very white, he could see them, but he could not see much else. It was so dark in this valley under the dark trees. "Prepare the victim," said the witch, and the dwarf undid Edmund's collar and folded back his shirt at the neck. Then he took Edmund's hair and pulled his head back so that he had to raise his chin. After that, Edmund heard a strange noise. Whiz, whiz, whiz. For a moment he couldn't think what it was. Then he realized it was the sound of a knife being sharpened. At that very moment he heard loud shouts from every direction, a drumming of hoofs and a beating of wings, a scream from the witch, confusion all around him, and then he found he was being untied. Strong arms were round him, and he heard big, kind voices saying things like, "Let him lie down. Give him some wine. Drink this. Steady on. Steady now. You'll be all right in a minute." Then he heard the voices of people who were not talking to him, but to one another, and they were saying things like, "Who's got the witch? I thought you had her. I didn't see her after I knocked the knife out of her hand. I was after the dwarf. Do you mean to say she's escaped? A chap can't mind everything at once. What's that? Oh, sorry. It's an old stump." But just at this point, Edmund went out in a dead faint. Presently, the centaurs and unicorns and deer and birds, they were, of course, the rescue party which Aslan had sent in the last chapter, all set off to go back to the stone table, carrying Edmund with them. But if they could have seen what happened in that valley after they had gone, I think they might have been surprised. It was perfectly still, and presently the moon grew bright. If you had been there, you would have seen the moonlight shining in an old tree stump and on a fair-sized boulder. But if you had gone on looking, you would gradually have begun to think there was something odd about both the stump and the boulder, and next you would have thought that the stump did really look remarkably like a little fat man crouching on the ground. And if you had watched long enough, you would have seen the stump walk across the boulder, and the boulder sit up and begin talking to the stump. For in reality, the stump and the boulder were simply the witch and the dwarf, for it was part of her magic that she could make things look like what they aren't. And she had the presence of mind to do it at the very moment when the knife was knocked out of her hand. She had kept hold of the wand, so it had been kept safe too. When the other children woke up next morning, they had been sleeping on piles of cushions in the pavilion. The first thing they heard from Mrs. Beaver was that their brother had been rescued and brought into camp late last night, and was at that moment with Aslan. As soon as they had breakfasted, they all went out, and there they saw Aslan and Edmund walking together in the dewy grass apart from the rest of the court. There is no need to tell you, and no one ever heard, what Aslan was saying, but it was a conversation which Edmund never forgot. As the others drew nearer, Aslan turned to meet him, bringing Edmund with him. "Here is your brother," he said, "and there is no need to talk to him about what is past." Edmund shook hands with each of the others and said to each of them in turn, "I'm sorry." And everyone said, "That's all right." And then everyone wanted very hard to say something which would make it quite clear that they were all friends with him again, something ordinary and natural, and of course no one could think of anything in the world to say. But before they had time to feel really awkward, one of the leopards approached Aslan and said, "Sire, there is a messenger from the enemy who craves audience." "Let him approach," said Aslan. The leopard went away and soon returned leading the witch's dwarf. "What is your message, son of earth?" asked Aslan. "The Queen of Narnia and Empress of the Lone Islands desires a safe conduct to come and speak with you," said the dwarf, "on a matter which is as much to your advantage as to hers." "Queen of Narnia, indeed," said Mr. Beaver. "Of all the peace, Beaver," said Aslan. "All names will soon be restored to their proper owners. In the meantime, we will not dispute about them. Tell your mistress, son of earth, that I grant her safe conduct on condition that she leaves her wand behind her at that great oak. This was agreed to, and 2 leopards went back with the dwarf to see that the conditions were properly carried out. But supposing she turns to the leopards into stone, whispered Lucy to Peter. I think the same idea had occurred to the leopards themselves. At any rate, as they walked off, their fur was all standing up on their backs, and their were bristling like a cat's when it sees a strange dog. It'll be all right, whispered Peter in reply. He wouldn't send them if it weren't. A few minutes later, the witch herself walked out on to the top of the hill and came straight across and stood before Aslan. The 3 children, who had not seen her before, felt shudders running down their backs at the sight of her face, and there were low growls among all the animals present. Though it was bright sunshine, everyone felt suddenly cold. The only 2 people present who seemed to be quite at their ease were Aslan and the witch herself. It was the oddest thing to see those 2 faces, the golden face and the dead white face, so close together. Not that the witch looked Aslan exactly in the eyes. Mrs. Beaver particularly noticed this. "You have a traitor there, Aslan," said the witch. Of course, everyone present knew that she meant Edmund, but Edmund had got past thinking about himself after all he'd been through and after the talk he'd had that morning. He just went on looking at Aslan. It didn't seem to matter what the witch said. "Well," said Aslan, "his offense was not against you." "Have you forgotten the deep magic?" asked the witch. "Let us say I have forgotten it," answered Aslan gravely. "Tell us of this deep magic." "Tell you?" said the witch, her voice growing suddenly shriller. "Tell you what is written on that very stone table which stands beside us? Tell you what is written in letters deep as a spear is long on the firestones on the secret hill? Tell you what is engraved on the scepter of the emperor beyond the sea? You at least know the magic which the emperor put into Narnia at the very beginning. You know that every traitor belongs to me as my lawful prey, and that for every treachery I have a right to a kill." "Oh," said Mr. Beaver, "so that's how you came to imagine yourself a queen, because you were the emperor's hangman, I see." "Peace, Beaver," said Aslan, with a very low growl. "And so," continued the witch, "that human creature is mine. His life is forfeit to me. His blood is my property." "Come and take it then," said the bull with the man's head, in a great bellowing voice. "Fool!" said the witch with a savage smile that was almost a snarl. "Do you really think your master can rob me of my rights by mere force? He knows the deep magic better than that. He knows that unless I have blood, as the law says, all Narnia will be overturned and perish in fire and water." "It is very true," said Aslan. "I do not deny it." "Oh, Aslan," whispered Susan in the lion's ear, "can't we, you won't, will you? Can't we do something about the deep magic? Isn't there something you can work against it?" "Work against the Emperor's magic?" said Aslan, turning to her with something like a frown on his face, and nobody ever made that suggestion to him ever again. Edmund was on the other side of Aslan, looking all the time at Aslan's face. He felt a choking feeling and wondered if he ought to say something, but a moment later he felt that he was not expected to do anything except to wait and do what he was told. "Fall back, all of you," said Aslan, "and I will talk to the witch alone." They all obeyed. It was a terrible time, this, waiting and wondering while the lion and the witch talked earnestly together in low voices. Lucy said, "Oh, Edmund," and began to cry. Peter stood with his back to the others, looking out at the distant sea. The beavers stood holding each other's paws with their heads bowed. The centaurs stamped uneasily with their hoofs. But everyone became perfectly still in the end, so that you noticed even the small sounds, like a bumblebee flying past, or the birds in the forest down below them, or the wind rustling in the leaves. And still the talk between Aslan and the White Witch went on. At last, they heard Aslan's voice. "You can all come back," he said. "I have settled the matter. She has renounced the claim on your brother's blood." And all over the hill there was a noise as if everyone had been holding their breath and had now begun breathing again, and then a murmur of talk. The witch was just turning away with a look of fierce joy on her face when she stopped and said, "But how do I know this promise will be kept?" Roared Aslan, half rising from his throne, and his great mouth opened wider and wider, and the roar grew louder and louder, and the witch, after staring for a moment with her lips wide apart, picked up her skirts and fairly ran for her life. That's the end of chapter 13. Chapter 14 is called The Triumph of the White Witch. I think this might be the last chapter in which the White Witch wins the battle and the story is over. I think that's what's going to happen. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. My voice is starting to give out, but I'm going to go ahead and finish this chapter, and then we're going to be done for the day. All right, chapter 14, the triumph of the White Witch. Actually, it's just the triumph of the witch. As soon as the witch had gone, Aslan said, "We must move from this place at once. It will be wanted for other purposes. We shall encamp tonight at the fords of Baruna." Of course, everyone was dying to ask him how he had arranged matters with the witch, but his face was stern and everyone's ears were still ringing with the sound of his roar, and so nobody dared. After a meal which was taken in the open air on the hilltop, for the sun had gone strong by now and dried the grass, they were busy for a while, taking the pavilion down and packing things up. Before 2 o'clock, they were on the march and set off in a northeasterly direction, walking at an easy pace, for they had not far to go. During the first part of the journey, Aslan explained to Peter his plan of campaign. "As soon as she has finished her business in these parts," he said, "the witch and her crew will almost certainly fall back to her house and prepare for a siege. You may or may not be able to cut her off and prevent her from reaching it." He then went on to outline 2 plans of battle, one for fighting the witch and her people in the wood, and another for assaulting her castle. And all the time he was advising Peter how to conduct the operation, saying things like, "You must put your centaurs in such and such a place," or "You must put scouts to see that she doesn't do so and so," till at last Peter said, "But you will be there yourself, Aslan." "I can give no promise of that," answered the lion, and he continued giving Peter his instructions. For the last part of the journey, it was Susan and Lucy who saw most of him. He did not talk very much and seemed to them to be sad. It was still afternoon when they came down to a place where the river valley had widened out, and the river was broad and shallow. This was the fords of Baruna, and Aslan gave orders to halt on this side of the water. But Peter said, "Wouldn't it be better to camp on the far side, for fear she should try a night attack or anything?" Aslan, who seemed to have been thinking about something else, roused himself with a shake of his magnificent mane and said, "Eh? What's that?" Peter said it all over again. "No," said Aslan in a dull voice, as if it didn't matter. "No, she will not make an attack tonight." And then he sighed deeply, but presently he added, "All the same, it was well thought of. That is how a soldier ought to think, but it doesn't really matter." So they proceeded to pitch their camp. Aslan's mood affected everyone that evening. Peter was feeling uncomfortable too at the idea of fighting the battle on his own. The news that Aslan might not be there had come as a great shock to him. Supper that evening was a quiet meal. Everyone felt how different it had been last night or even that morning. It was as if the good times, having just begun, were already drawing to their end. This feeling affected Susan so much that she couldn't get to sleep when she went to bed. And after she had lain counting sheep and turning over and over, she heard Lucy give a long sigh and turn over just beside her in the darkness. "Can't you get to sleep either?" said Susan. "No," said Lucy. "I thought you were asleep. I say, Susan." "What?" "I've got a horrible feeling as if something were hanging over us." "Have you? Because, as a matter of fact, so have I." "Something about Aslan," said Lucy. "Either some dreadful thing is going to happen to him, or something dreadful that he's going to do." "There's been something wrong with him all afternoon," said Susan. "Lucy, what was that he said about not being with us at the battle? You don't think he could be stealing away and leaving us tonight, do you?" "Where is he now?" said Lucy. "Is he here in the pavilion?" "I don't think so." "Susan, let's go outside and have a look around. We might see him." "All right, let's," said Susan. "We might just as well be doing that as lying awake here." Very quietly, the two girls groped their way among the other sleepers and crept out of the tent. The moonlight was bright and everything was quite still except for the noise of the river chattering over the stones. Then Susan suddenly caught Lucy's arm and said, "Look!" On the far side of the camping ground, just where the trees began, they saw the lion slowly walking away from them into the wood. Without a word, they both followed him. He led them up the steep slope out of the river valley and then slightly to the right, apparently by the very same route which they had used that afternoon in coming from the hill of the stone table. On and on he led them into dark shadows and out into pale moonlight, getting their feet wet with the heavy dew. He looked somehow different from the Aslan they knew. His tail and his head hung low, and he walked slowly as if he were very, very tired. Then, when they were crossing a wide open place where there were no shadows for them to hide in, he stopped and looked around. It was no good trying to run away, so they came toward him. When they were closer, he said, "Oh, children, children, why are you following me?" "We couldn't sleep," said Lucy, and then felt sure that she needed to say no more and that Aslan knew all that they had been thinking. "Please, may we come with you, wherever you're going?" asked Susan. "Well," said Aslan, and seemed to be thinking. Then he said, "I should be glad of company tonight. Yes, you may come, if you promise to stop when I tell you. And after that, leave me alone. Leave me to go on alone." "Oh, thank you, and we will," said the two girls. Forward they went again, and one of the girls walked on either side of the lion. But how slowly he walked, and his great royal head drooped so that his nose nearly touched the grass. Presently he stumbled. What? His nose nearly touched the grass. Thank you, Kimberly, for catching that. Presently he stumbled and gave a low moan. "Aslan, dear Aslan," said Lucy. "What is wrong? Can't you tell us?" "Are you ill, dear Aslan?" asked Susan. "No," said Aslan. "I am sad and lonely." "Lay your hands on my mane so that I can feel you are there, and let us walk like that." And so the girls did what they would never have dared to do without his permission, but what they had longed to do ever since they first saw him, buried their cold hands in the beautiful sea of fur and stroked it, and so doing walked with him. And presently they saw that they were going with him up the slope of the hill on which the stone table stood. They went up at the side where the trees came furthest up, and when they got to the last tree, it was one that had some bushes about it. Aslan stopped and said, "Oh, children, children, here you must stop, and whatever happens, do not let yourself be seen. Farewell." And both the girls cried bitterly, though they hardly knew why, and clung to the lion and kissed his mane and his nose, not his noise, and his paws and his great sad eyes. Then he turned from them and walked out on to the top of the hill, and Lucy and Susan, crouching in the bushes, looked after him, and this is what they saw. A great crowd of people were standing all round the stone table, and though the moon was shining, many of them carried torches which burned with evil-looking red flames and black smoke. But such people, ogres with monstrous teeth, and wolves and bull-headed men, spirits of evil trees and poisonous plants, and other creatures whom I won't describe, because if I did, the grown-ups would probably not let you read this book. Cruels and hags and incubuses. Incubuses. I don't even know what that is. Maybe that's one of the things that they can't describe because grown-ups won't let you read it. Wraiths, horrors, ifrits, sprites, orkneys, woozes, and ettins. I don't even know what half of those things are. In fact, here were all those who were on the witch's side and whom the wolf had summoned at her command. And right in the middle, standing by the table, was the witch herself. A howl and a gibber of dismay went up from the creatures when they first saw the great lion pacing toward them, and for a moment even the witch herself seemed to be struck with fear. Then she recovered herself and gave a wild, fierce laugh. "The fool!" she cried. "The fool has come! Bind him fast!" Lucy and Susan held their breaths, waiting for Aslan's roar and his spring upon his enemies, but it never came. Four hags, grinning and leering, yet also at first hanging back and half afraid of what they had to do, had approached him. "Bind him, I say!" repeated the White Witch. The hags made a dart at him and shrieked with triumph when they found that he made no resistance at all. Then others, evil dwarves and apes, rushed in to help them, and between them they rolled the huge lion over on his back and tied all four his paws together, shouting and cheering as if they had done something brave. Though had the lion chosen, one of those paws could have been the death of them all. But he made no noise. He also made no nose. He made no noise, even when the enemy, straining and tugging, pulled the cords so tight that they cut into his flesh. Then they began to drag him toward the stone table. Here they are, dragging him to the stone table. Here's the picture. I hope this is focusing. "Stop!" said the witch. "Let him first be shaved." Another roar of mean laughter went up from her followers as an ogre with a pair of shears came forward and squatted down by Aslan's head. Snip, snip, snip with the shears. JJ, don't do that right now. Snip, snip, snip went the shears, and masses of curling gold began to fall to the ground. Then the ogre stood back, and the children, watching from their hiding place, could see the face of Aslan, looking all small and different without its mane. The enemies also saw the difference. "Why, he's only a great cat after all," cried one. "Is that what we were afraid of?" said another, and they surged round Aslan, jeering at him, saying things like, "Puss, puss, poor pussy," and "How many mice have you caught today, cat?" and "Would you like a saucer of milk, pussums?" "Oh, how can they?" said Lucy, tears streaming down her cheeks. "The brutes, the brutes!" For now that the first shock was over, the shorn face of Aslan looked to her braver and more beautiful and more patient than ever. "Muzzle him," said the witch, And even now, as they worked about his face, putting on the muzzle, one bite from his jaws would have cost 2 or 3 of them their hands. But he never moved, and this seemed to enrage all the rabble. Everyone was at him now. Those who had been afraid to come near him even after he was bound began to find their courage, and for a few minutes the 2 girls could not even see him. So thickly was he surrounded by the whole crowd of creatures, kicking him, hitting him, spitting on him, jeering at him. At last the rabble had had enough of this. They began to drag the bound and muzzled lion to the stone table, some pulling and some pushing. He was so huge that even when they got him there, it took all their effort to hoist him onto the surface of it. Then there was more tying and tightening of cords. The cowards, sobbed Susan. Are they still afraid of him even now? When once Aslan had been tied and tied so that he was really a mass of cords. On the flat stone, a hush fell on the crowd. 4 hags, holding 4 torches, stood at the corners of the table. The witch bared her arms, and as she had bared them the previous night when it had been Edmund instead of Aslan. Then she began to whet her knife. It looked to the children, when the gleam of the torchlight fell on it, as if the knives were made of stone, not of steel, and it was of a strange and evil shape. At last she drew near. She stood by Aslan's head. Her face was working and twitching with passion, but his looked up at the sky, still quiet, neither angry nor afraid, but a little sad. Then, just before she gave the blow, she stooped down and said in a quivering voice, "And now who has won? Fool, did you think that by all this you would save the human traitor? Now I will kill you instead of him, as our pact was, and so the deep magic will be appeased. But when you are dead, what will prevent me from killing him as well? And who will take him out of my hand then? Understand that you have given me Narnia forever. You have lost your own life, and you have not saved his. In that knowledge, despair and die." The children did not see the actual moment of the killing. They could not bear to look and had covered their eyes. Tomorrow we will begin with chapter 15, which is called Deeper Magic from Before the Dawn of Time. The first word is while. So I hope that's not too much of a cliffhanger for you. We'll have to see how Peter does with this battle that's coming up the next day. And I hope that y'all enjoyed tonight's reading. Sorry about the late start, about being unorganized at the beginning. I think Kimberly and JJ both have a picture to show you, so here I'll turn it over to them. Here's JJ. He's got a tank, and why don't you describe the picture? It says boom boom.
So, it's I kind of just made my own video game because so you're gonna be the tank. You're gonna be shooting enemies, and then
Is one of the enemies?
and you need to collect the pearls to upgrade your tank.
Okay. Okay. Now, Kimberly.
I was just like sketching, and I made a mini Aslan. Not sure if you can see it very well.
Mini Aslan. Oh yeah.
And this one is it's a pony, a unicorn, and this one's a dragon. You can't see it very well because it's in pencil.
Okay, well, maybe if we get a little closer. Can you see the sketching?
A little better.
Better.
Especially the darker one.
Okay, here you go. I think Daniel has something now. Go ahead. Tell them what it is. They can't see you. They can't see the book. Oh, wow. That's like Peter's weapons.
Yeah.
Awesome. She can move. Okay. So we're at over an hour now. Again, sorry about the late start. That was my fault. But that is, Rebecca says, wow, very cool, Daniel. And it is very cool. That sword and shield is really cool. It also actually reminds me of the armor of God, which maybe we'll discuss in a later live stream. So I hope y'all enjoyed the story tonight. We've got 3 chapters left. We'll probably get it all tomorrow. I hope that you all have a good night, and God bless you. We'll see you next time.